Hello everyone, and welcome to my The Bold Fans channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Bill maintained a tight posture, his face a mask of righteous anger. His earlier comments rang in her memory, each phrase like a hammer hammering her resolve. Stay in jail for the rest of your life. The memory of his rough, hard voice made her stomach turn. Lee never anticipated it would come to this. She was a doctor, a healer, and had dedicated her life to helping others. But suddenly she was portrayed as a monster, a collaborator in a horrible murder that had shattered families and left a town grieving. Luna, her alleged collaborator, sat next her, her expression colorless and unreadable. The two women, once colleagues bonded by their shared passion for medicine, were now linked by something far darker. A web of accusations that neither could entirely unravel. The story began months ago, in the calm hallways of Port Charles General Hospital. Lee was a highly regarded cardiologist noted for her precision and persistent dedication. Luna, a bright scientist, worked at the hospital's research lab, inventing new therapies that were expected to transform patient care. Their paths collided during a clinical study for a new heart drug with the potential to save countless lives. They quickly became friends, bonded by their common goal of a better future. But ambition casts shadows, and theirs got longer with each passing day. It began with whispers, rumors of fake data in the trial. A patient died abruptly, and the cause was unknown. Fingers were pointed, and the hospital was quickly put under scrutiny. Lee and Luna, the trial's main figures, were the first to face questions. At first, they stood together, maintaining that the data was sound and the trial was ethical. However, evidence began to mount. Altered records, missing samples, and a trail of emails indicating that someone tampered with the results in order to speed the medicine to market. Bill, the hospital's main administrator, was tireless in his search for the truth. He had always been a guy of principle, but he also enjoyed having power. The trial was his legacy, an opportunity to establish the hospital's reputation as a pioneer in medical innovation. When the controversy surfaced, he took it personally, believing that Lee and Luna had betrayed him directly. His investigation was quick and merciless. He went through every record, interviewed every employee, and assembled a case that pointed directly to the two ladies. Lee recalls the day he confronted her. It was late, and the hospital corridors were empty but for the hum of fluorescent lights. Bill had summoned her to his office, his face a storm cloud. "You've disgraced this institution," he replied, his voice quiet yet angry. "You and Luna believed you could play God, right? Falsifying data, jeopardizing lives, for what? Money? Fame?" Lee attempted to explain, her voice cracking as she swore she was innocent, that the errors were unintentional, and that someone else had changed the data. But Bill was not listening. His mind was made up, and his words sliced deeper than a scalpel. "You're finished, Lee. You'll pay for this." Luna's confrontation was as severe. She had always been quieter, more reserved than Lee, but her mind was sharp. When Bill accused her, she responded with facts, pointing out contradictions in the evidence and holes in the timetable. But Bill remained unimpressed. He saw her as the genius behind the tampering, while Lee was the public face. "You're both going down," he told her, his gaze steely. "I'll make sure of it." The trial was a spectacle. The prosecution portrayed a damning picture. Lee and Luna, motivated by greed, willfully promoted a deadly medicine while fabricating results to conceal its risks. The patient's death was the focus of their case, which they argued could have been avoided. The media loved the tale, blaring headlines across all outlets. "Doctors betray trust. Scandal rocks the hospital." Lee and Luna became pariahs, their images flashed on screens and their names associated with betrayal. Lee's family was devastated. Her husband, Mark, sat in court every day, his face etched with anguish. He believed in her innocence, but the tension was palpable. Emily, their 16-year-old daughter, stopped attending school because she couldn't handle the whispers and looks. Lee would catch glimpses of them in the museum, their eyes filled with both love and anguish. She wanted to reach out and promise them everything would be fine, but the constraints of her situation kept her back. Luna had no family, save then a younger brother who lived across the nation. He sent her letters encouraging her to keep strong, but they were few and far between. Luna's power came from within, and Lee envied her calm resilience. Luna remained unwavering in the face of mounting evidence. She spent nights in her cell going over legal paperwork, looking for evidence to support their innocence. "We didn't do this," she whispered to Lee through the bars. "We just need one break, one piece of evidence to turn this around." However, the breaks never arrived. The prosecution's case was strong, based on fabricated documents and devastating testimony from coworkers who said Lee and Luna coerced them to remain silent. Sarah, a young nurse, said that Lee threatened her employment if she questioned the trial outcomes. Lee looked at her in bewilderment, her heart sinking. She'd mentored Sarah, spent hours teaching her, and confided in her. The treachery was an unhealable wound. Bill was the prosecution's star witness. He took the stand with an air of authority, his sentences measured but full of scorn. He slammed Lee and Luna as reckless and morally bankrupt, accusing them of putting profit before of patience. His testimony was the last nail in the coffin. The jury, already influenced by the media frenzy, did not require much convincing. After an agonizingly brief deliberation, they returned with their verdict: guilty. The sentence was fast. The judge, a stern man with worn eyes, stared at Lee and Luna as if they were strangers, rather than ladies who had saved lives. "The court finds you both responsible for gross negligence and fraud," he added, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "You are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel fell, and Lee felt the world shift beneath her. Bill's voice echoed in her ears as the bailiff escorted her away. "Stay in jail for the rest of your life." She turned to face him, looking for a resemblance of the guy she had once admired, but all she saw was triumph. Luna, alongside her, held her head up, although her hands trembled. They were transferred to separate cells, and Lee knew the sound of the bars would stay with her. Life in prison was a long and depressing decline. The days blurred together, punctuated only by the monotony of routine, meals, headcounts, and the odd visit from Mark or Emily. Lee clung to the visits, even if each one was more difficult than the last. Emily was getting distant, her eyes full with questions that Lee could not answer. Mark tried to be strong, but the strain was breaking him. "I'm fighting for you," he'd remark, but his tone lacked passion. Luna, in her own way, adjusted. She read every book in the jail library, wrote letters to her brother, and began teaching other inmates basic chemistry. "Knowledge is the only freedom we have left," she said Lee during one of their few moments together in the yard. But Lee lacked the necessary strength. She felt hollow, her identity as a doctor wiped away and replaced with a number and a jumpsuit. Months passed into years and the outside world moved on. The hospital rebounded, the trial vanished from the news, and Bill was lauded as a hero for exposing wrongdoing. But Lee and Luna carried the truth, or at least their interpretation of it. They had not falsified the data. They had not endangered anyone. Someone else had, someone with access and motivation, and they had framed them to protect their own interests. But who? And why? The solution arrived unexpectedly, 5 years into their imprisonment. Karen, a former hospital administrator, is a new inmate at the penitentiary. She had been found guilty of embezzlement, but her misdeeds went deeper. Karen communicated what she knew during whispered chats in the cafeteria. During the trial, she worked for Bill and was in charge of the hospital's finances. She said Bill was behind the controversy, manipulating records to frame Lee and Luna. What is the motive? To protect his image and negotiate a lucrative deal with the pharmaceutical company funding the experiment. The patient's death was a horrible accident, but Bill used it to shift blame, allowing the medicine to enter the market without additional investigation. Lee's heart pounded as Karen spoke. It was the break they'd been looking for, and the proof they required. But Karen was cautious, fearful of repercussions. "Bill has powerful friends," she said. "If I talk, they'll come for me." Luna, ever the strategist, persuaded her to speak up, vowing to safeguard her as best they could. They approached a lawyer, Rachel, a young public defender who supported their claim. Rachel investigated the issue, revealing anomalies in the hospital's financial records and emails that pointed to Bill's involvement. The appeals procedure was arduous. Rachel worked relentlessly, but the system was slow, and Bill's impact was considerable. He denied everything, leaving his public image untarnished. The media, which had previously sought to discredit Lee and Luna, was suspicious of their assertions. "Disgraced doctors seek revenge," one headline read. But Rachel persisted, and Karen's testimony, combined with additional evidence, started to change the narrative. The second trial was quieter, less dramatic, but no less intense. Lee and Luna sat together again, their hopes frail but alive. Rachel provided fresh evidence, including manipulated financial documents, a concealed email chain, and Karen's sworn statement. Bill entered the stand, his confidence unshakable, but cracks began to appear. He stuttered over queries and gave unclear answers. The jury pondered for days, and Lee thought every second was a lifetime. When the verdict arrived, it was a partial victory. Although the first accusations were reversed, the damage had already been done. Lee and Luna were free, but their reputations were tattered and their careers had ended. The hospital settled out of court, providing a large sum to avoid further investigation, but the agreement sounded hollow. Bill was not charged. His connections protected him, just as Karen had anticipated. Lee returned to a world that no longer felt familiar. Mark had moved on, unable to wait indefinitely. Emily was in college, distant but trying to mend their relationship. Luna left Port Charles to start over in a remote village where no one recognized her identity. The two ladies kept in touch, their friendship a lifeline, but the scars persisted. Lee often recalled Bill's nasty pronouncement in court. She hadn't spent the rest of her life in jail, but she still felt imprisoned by sorrow, loss, and the knowledge that justice was incomplete. She went about her days silently, a shell of the woman she once was, plagued by the fact that true criminals sometimes go free. Lee's mouth parted, but no words emerged. She wanted to shout, reject everything, and claw back the tiny bits of hope she had brought with her to this place. Instead, all she could muster was a broken gasp, drowned by the silence of the room. Her hands trembled, the iron shackles cutting into her skin like painful reminders of the chains she couldn't break free from. Luna sat slouched across the aisle, her look alternately defiant and resignation. She was already used to the sting of judgment, being labeled as a criminal, pariah, or monster. But witnessing Lee condemned beside her tore at something deep within her. She had hoped, even prayed in her own bitter, cynical way, that Lee would be spared and would not have to drown in the same black sea Luna was already drowning in. And now, with the finality of one gavel stroke, she realized they were destined to suffer together. Jail was more than just captivity. It was the burial of what they once were. The guards dragged Lee to her feet, and she staggered, her face pallid and her eyes wide as a trapped bird. She turned to face the throng, hoping to find someone, anyone, who still believed in her innocence, or at least her humanity. But the onlookers had already turned away, muttering to one another and shaking their heads as if the trial had revealed nothing new. To them, she was guilty, dangerous, and should be imprisoned indefinitely. There were no tears shed for her. Nobody yelled her name in protest. When the courthouse doors opened, a surge of frigid air swept in, brushing against her like the hand of a ghost. Lee and Luna were led through a lengthy corridor, their footfall hollow and heavy. The shackles clinked with each step, a sound that would soon become their daily routine and nightly lullaby. They did not speak to one another. They did not need to. Both realized the quiet was stronger than any words they could say. The transport van was dark and smelled like rust and old sweat. The metal bench was merciless, and the atmosphere was oppressive. Lee placed her back against the wall, her hands securely folded in her lap, as if she could hold herself together just through willpower. Luna, on the other hand, leaned forward with her gaze locked on the floor and her jaw tightened. She had been here too many times before, yet something about this trip was different. She was not alone this time, and that terrified her more than loneliness ever did. Hours later, the van came to a stop before the prison's imposing gates. The sky above was darkening, and the first stars appeared dimly in the distance, like disinterested eyes looking down from above. The giant steel doors groaned open, revealing the concrete beast that would swallow their years, dreams, and entire identities. The guards yelled instructions, and the captives shuffled inside, their expressions etched with despair, anger, or mute surrender. Lee felt the weight of the prison push down on her chest as soon as she stepped inside. The walls appeared to shut in, choking her with the smell of bleach and despair. Each corridor resonated with distant yells, the clatter of boots, and the crash of metal doors. She wanted to escape, scream, and beg someone to end the horror. But her body moved by itself, following Luna and the others into the beast's belly. Their cell was tiny, just big enough for the two of them. A single barred window perched high on the wall, letting in a sliver of pale light that reminded them of the world outside, which they couldn't touch. The bed frames creaked as they sat down, and the thin mattresses reeked of dampness and years of usage. Lee curled up on her bed, embracing her knees to her chest, while Luna lay flat on hers, staring at the ceiling with unwavering gaze. Hours passed and the stillness between them became uncomfortable. Finally, Lee muttered, her voice wavering like the delicate flicker of a candle. "Why did this happen? I never wanted any of this." Luna tilted her head slightly, her gaze drawn to the faint light. "Life doesn't care what we want," she stated bluntly. "It takes and takes until nothing remains. You'll find out soon enough." Lee's throat clenched and tears welled in her eyes. She sank her face between her knees to muffle her tears, but the sound continued to fill the chamber. Luna listened, her chest aching from something she refused to identify. She had pledged long ago not to care and never to let anyone in again. Caring entailed pain. It indicated vulnerability. Nonetheless, hearing Lee crack alongside her felt like being torn apart on the inside. Days moved into weeks, which blurred into months. Time in prison did not flow as freely as it did in the outside world. It was stagnant, weighty, and oppressive. The days were defined solely by the clang of doors, food rations, and the constant noise of tortured beings squeezed into concrete boxes. Lee became paler, her eyes sunken, and her hands trembled with each passing day. She was delicate before, but now, enclosed by walls that consumed light, she appeared to wither. Luna, toughened by years of survival, attempted to maintain her distance. But she couldn't ignore Lee's silent misery, the way she cringed at every yell and gripped her blanket at night as if it could keep her safe from the dark. Against her better judgment, Luna began to speak to her more frequently, delivering little comforts in the form of words, even if those words were harsh realities. Slowly, a frail link formed between them, held together by their shared sorrow. One night, when the prison was unusually silent, Lee whispered, "Do you think anyone out there misses us?" Luna was silent for a long time. Eventually, she shook her head. "They forget. The world continues moving." The words stabbed Lee's heart like a knife. She wanted to protest, to insist that someone still cared and was waiting for her. But deep down, she knew Luna was correct. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall silently down her cheeks. Seasons changed outside the barred window, but they could scarcely tell from inside. Years passed past their fingers like sand, leaving only memories of lives they couldn't touch. Lee's energy faded, her joy and smile gone. Luna watched her fade, and while she told herself she didn't mind, the truth gnawed at her every day. One morning, Lee did not get out of bed. She lay quiet, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Luna's chest tightened with panic, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. She gently shook Lee, whispering her name, but the girl did not respond. For the first time in her life, Luna pleaded to the nothingness itself, pleading with it not to remove the only source of light left in her darkness. Lee survived, but very barely. The prison doctor described her as sickly, emaciated, and spiritually shattered. Luna sat alongside her, watching her sleep, and something inside her solidified. She knew then that this institution wasn't simply stealing their time. It was slowly murdering them piece by piece. And she couldn't let Lee disappear like this. Not when she was the only surviving human being. Time passed, and although Lee's health never entirely healed, she clung to Luna like an anchor. Luna, in turn, became her guardian, shielding her from the horrors of the institution. They endured together, their link formed not out of love, but out of necessity, knowing that without each other, they would have drowned long before. Nonetheless, the punishment hung over them like an interminable storm. For the rest of your life. The words rang every day, telling them that freedom was a fantasy they would never realize again. Their lives became a cycle of survival, of clinging on to one another in the face of adversity, of finding small moments of peace in a world out to destroy them. Years merged into decades,